Snowtroopers. You know, I was looking at that Saturn V and the lunar module. Not lunar module I didn't build, but the Saturn V and the Explorer satellite I did. And building rockets can be a little bit trickier than it seems. Uh, you know, when you look at a model rocket kit, you think, well, you know, it's a tube basically, tankage, and we're only building the outside, and you know, a few decals, some stripes and stuff. But when you actually get to building them, trying to get rid of long seams down the side and everything, and all of the you know, get a little detail in there, and you realize they always have these tiny little markings and little, they're just full of little access hatches and pieces of equipment and antennas and stuff. To make a really detailed model of a rocket is a deceptively difficult thing to do. If you're dealing with something like the Atlas, you've got all that metal aluminum, which doesn't have any markings, but unless you're good with a metallizer, it can be hard to get a good looking finish. And when I did that Saturn V, I ran into more trouble than I expected, and just masking off around the corrugated areas. Something I didn't think of at the time, but when you're dealing with masking like corrugated areas and stuff like that, one thing you can do, I know I use Play-Doh to get a feathered edge, because you roll it and you lay it on the model like I did with the B25, you spray across it, and it usually produces a pretty nice feathered edge. But you can also cut Play-Doh with a knife, and you can pack it into areas or something that's corrugated or something, and then trim it out, and it'll give you a real nice edge, but it'll fill in the gaps. And I've used Play-Doh to fill in gaps for painting before. So that's one method. And I'm wondering if you guys have a particular method for masking off. I use corrugated metal, you know, the wavy metal as an example, because it's a classic example of something that's very difficult to mask off. But any other area, maybe around a fillet on a wing or something with Play-Doh, do it with a knife. I'm just wondering if you guys have any special techniques you use for, you know, painting these hard to get to places, assuming you're using an airbrush. And that was just something I was thinking about when I was looking at the rocket. It turned out to be quite the little bugaboo to get all that done. And up close, you can still see the blemishes, which is why I keep it way up on top of the shelf. The more I study these spacecraft and read books like Rocket Ranch and Mike Mullane's Riding Rockets and all these other books I've got on the space program, not on the old space program, but the current one, the more just amazes me the complexity of these things. And also, speaking of painting things, as I mentioned very briefly yesterday in a little afterpiece I stuck in there, if you are, for the B25 build, if you are doing a doolittle Raider, just a little point of detail, they did not have the yellow tips on the propellers. And I was wondering why, because you would think around a carrier deck, they'd want the extra safety. All those, you know, big multi-engine airplanes that the sailors weren't used to working with. And I can only guess as to why. And I think one reason might be was sneaking up and stealth was an important part of the mission. And yellow tips on propellers spinning at a certain speed could make a nice pretty yellow arc for gunners to train their guns on. So it may have been sort of a low visibility thing. I'm just guessing on that. But according to the photos I researched, the only writing on the propeller was at the root of the propeller. And the airplanes did receive a fresh coat of paint somewhere not too long before they left, I believe. Somebody made that comment that they repainted the planes, which would make sense because they had gone to depot level maintenance before. This was in Doolittle's book, I Can Never Be So Lucky Again. They had gone to depot level maintenance before the raid, and the airplanes were specially set up for the low altitude mission, stripped of all unnecessary gear, which is why I don't think they have the normal antenna array. The only antenna wire I saw, it's hard to make out because of the grain of the photos, but the only antenna wire I saw, there was a wire that went from one tail to the radio mast. And they did have some radio equipment because they were supposed to track beacons in China, which none of them were able to do. Oh, by the way, don't forget, One of the airplanes survived the mission. Everybody thinks they were all lost. One of them went to Russia, and then the Russians claimed that they, interned the aircraft. What they did was use it for a couple of years until they ran out of parts, which is what I'd have done with it. But anyway, back to painting the model. The paint job was a normal military. There were 16 aircraft. I think only 5 or 6 of them had names. We all know Ruptured Duck. There was TNT, Avenger, and a few others. A lot of the guys didn't name their aircraft. If I got my numbers right, the numbers that came with the decal on the decal sheet were actually Doolittle's airplane, and he did not name his aircraft. And he wasn't really sentimental that way. He's a very practical guy. But the other thing about those B25s is that I noticed in the photos is that there was some chipping of the paint. I like to age them a little, but I wouldn't overage it. The planes were fairly freshly painted when they were put on the carrier, but paint chips off, especially something that big. But it looked like most of the paint was missing off the top of the wings. It's not like a lot was missing, just a little bit, but there were a few, quite a noticeable number of them, but they were mostly off the top of the wings. The fuselages looked like they really hadn't lost any paint, at least what I could see in the photos, and that actually makes sense. The props had a little wear on the edge because they'd done a lot of training, but it makes sense that the top of the wings would lose a little bit of paint because as the carrier steamed, the wind was constantly blowing over the wings, and of course the wings were also getting hit by rain and the elements and the sun, so the top of the wings usually the first thing to fade or chip on an airplane for that reason, except for the leading edge. But remember, they had de-icing boots, and those were de-icing boots, so there's no chipping on those. So just if you're detailing it out, and of course there's plenty of resource photos where just type in B-25 Doolittle and hit images, and you'll see plenty of actual photos of the airplanes. But there are some good high quality ones out there that make it a little bit easier to detail. And that was, the airplanes only had 3 guns on them. They had old 30 caliber for the Bombardier, and they had the twin 50s in the turret, and that was it. They stripped everything else out. Of course, they had the broomsticks out the tail, but their attitude was, man, we're going to pounce by the whole Japanese Air Force. The only thing that might save us is speed and altitude. And they had made flying gas cans out of those things. If you can find, if you're making a diorama of it, you can find some square tin 5-gallon gas cans. I believe that's what they carried on board. The movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo is so accurate about that because they had all the people and equipment, still in operation when the movie was made. So they were able to make an extremely accurate movie about it. Good model work too. Some of the best I've ever seen. Ted Lawson, who flew Ruptured Duck, was the pilot that wrote the book, which became the movie. Unfortunately, of course, he wound up having to have a leg amputated, but that's unfortunate. But they had others that were caught and some that were executed, and it was. But if I'm not mistaken, their ashes, because the Japanese cremated those they executed, but their ashes were brought back to the U.S. after the war. So there's that. But incredible mission. It was actually a submarine commander that came up with the idea, and I believe his name was Lowe. And apparently he'd seen some bombers doing some stuff. Said, I bet you could get one of those off a carrier. And there's a lot of articles online about how he came up with the idea. It was one of the more interesting missions in the annals of flying. And speaking of interesting flying, a lot of people have asked about doing some stuff on women in aviation, and I am planning to do that for the air race series. And in fact, I was just thinking yesterday about Pancho, and you know what? Maybe instead of taking a model with me, I think we're going to take that air racing book with me, and just to get my, because it's kind of like an almanac to get the facts straight. And I think I'm going to start working on the script for the next installment in the air race series, which is about the women in air racing. And there's just some interesting stuff in there that the things are never quite what they appear to be. So, and as always with something like that, there's a little bit of controversy. I kind of try to avoid controversy here because we come to get away from that. But this is historical controversy, and the kind of stuff that it just depends on who you ask. Well, anyway, yeah, I'm going to take that book with me. That's what I'm going to work on. In fact, I think I'll start reading on that today. I don't think I have too much left to do on the B25, and I'm trying to discipline myself not to go out and try to set it on that gear too early. I used a fair amount of glue. I'm thinking about really just giving it the whole 4 days I'm gone to harden. Of course, I know me better than that. I probably won't be able to resist unless I stay out of the TARDIS, but I got to head off to work in a few hours anyway, so I should be able to stay away from it and just, putting a model in front of me that's drying is like putting a cupcake in front of me. I just, I want to, not bad. That's why I need to go find something else to do. The best way to distract me, of course, is to have another model to work on. Or bacon. Guys, take care of yourselves, and as always, model on. What is the meaning of life? Oh yeah, to build models. Okay, that question's answered. And that kind of freaky smile, isn't it? Of course, I really smile like this. I do this just to sort of be weird. Kind of freaking myself out there. Why do you park in a driveway and drive on a parkway? If a car has R for reverse, then why doesn't it have F for forward? How come bulldozers don't have steering wheels? Question of the day. You got a choice of one of two missions in space. A spacewalk where you're like in the manned maneuvering unit flying around, or a lunar mission where you get to walk on the moon. It'd be a tough one for me because as a kid I grew up just really wanting me to be the lunar mission. But I gotta admit, a spacewalk, man, that'd be some kind of cool, huh?